Hello, and welcome to Under 1000. My name's Thomas Flower, and each episode I'll read you a new piece of flash fiction. All of the stories are 1000 words or less. Today, I'll be reading Bottled Emotions. Before we begin today's episode, I just wanted to take a brief moment to say that after this episode, I'm going to be taking a break from Under 1000 for a few weeks. I won't be gone for good, I promise. I'm coming back, and the episode should resume sometime in September. Thanks for listening. I hope you stick with me and enjoy today's episode. Harry strolled down the aisles, looking with confusion at the goods laid out on the shelves. Where was he now? World Foods? He checked his list, and concluded that he didn't need anything from here anyway. Turning his trolley around, he trundled back up, and over into Health and Beauty. Now, here was an aisle he did need to visit. What exactly did the list mention? Soap, razors, shampoo. Wandering lazily towards the shampoo display, Harry paused, taking a moment to pop the lid of each bottle and take a short, sharp sniff, trying to determine what might be most appreciated by the household. As he picked up a deep blue bottle and flicked the lid back, his inhalation stopped, catching suddenly in his throat. The scent was familiar somehow, like a buried thought drifting lazily to the front of his mind once again. But as Harry turned the bottle over, he could not remember seeing the package before, nor did he recognize the name. What is that smell? Comes in a bottle made of chemicals in a factory, but it smells like a hug and a warm blanket. Where could I have encountered this before? He thought to himself, feeling somehow disorientated and confused by the rush of emotions the strange artificial smell was stirring within him. Trying to shake the feeling off, Harry placed the bottle back on the shelf, letting it sit alongside the many copies of itself. It was as though he hoped reminding himself it was simply a mass-produced supermarket object would help him to let go of the strange semi-memory now gripping him. But it did not. And as he stood back up and began to walk away, he noticed that tears were coming to his eyes, falling like heavy drops down on the boxes and packets in the trolley below. What had got a hold of him? He wasn't usually like this. In fact, he felt a little ashamed at such a sudden and obvious public display of emotions. It felt as though he was naked, raw, stripped for all the world to see the turmoil of thoughts and feelings within him. And yet, he knew that this was not the case. After all, he was just a man, pushing a trolley, looking at soap, with a tear or two in his eyes. Everyone else could not see what was happening for him behind the surface, and he tried to remind himself of that very fact. But the emotions felt so overwhelming, and try as he might to put them behind him, he didn't seem to be able to close them up and walk away as easily as he had been able to do with the shampoo. Suddenly, it struck him. A tiny sight, coming in pieces to form an entire picture. A bathtub. That was all he saw at first. And then, the sound of water gently being run over his head. His mother, laughing, smiling, and massaging his scalp with the tips of her fingers. And, he realised then, the shampoo he had just held must have been the same one she had once used. But it still didn't explain why it had caused him such upset. As he looked through bars of soap, only half engaged, his brain continued to tick over, excavating individual pieces of the memory until he was able to form a coherent whole. What had been happening when that bath had taken place? He had been 5, maybe 6 years old. And though he had often been left to wash himself by then, his mother had wanted to be there with him for some reason. What was it? There was some kind of change coming. He couldn't place it, but he sensed it somehow, like a feeling without words which had laid in him, waiting to be revealed again. The house. They were leaving. Going on to the home he remembered with far more clarity. The home he had grown up in and could picture in precise and vivid detail. But this memory of the bath, of his mother, of the whole scene, it had been the night before they moved, before things changed, and she had wanted him to feel safe, protected and cared for, because she knew that this would be disruptive to him, leaving the only home he had ever known. But the memory had been diluted, mixed with feelings he associated from after. The picture of the house from the rearview window of a car growing smaller and smaller in the distance. The knowledge that they would not be returning. And the sudden fear that the place he had thought was a constant pillar of safety and security in his life was now being taken away from him. All that, bound together in some strange, locked chamber of his mind, which the smell of the shampoo had managed to reveal. Harry stopped, unsure what to do now that he had uncovered the truth for himself. The memory was not one of pain or trauma, at least in retrospect. It was a part of life, and one that he was now familiar with. But to be transported back into his young and simplistic understanding of the world, even for only a few moments, was as fascinating as it was unnerving. Returning to the shelf of identical blue bottles, he picked one up, opened it just a little to take in the scent again, and then, on a sudden and rash impulse, threw it into the cart. He would buy it for himself and keep it as his own slice of the past. It wasn't on the list, but it seemed just as important now as any of the necessities he had come in for. Thank you for listening to Under 1000. I'm your host, Thomas Flower. To follow the show online, look for Under 1000 Pod on Twitter or Facebook, or check out the website at under1000pod.com. If you'd like to support the show on Patreon, go to patreon.com/under1000pod, where you can sign up to read each month's stories in advance, as well as to have a thank you be read during these credits. The theme music is an instrumental version of In Between Days by Nick Tate and the Sharks. To hear the full song, and more from the same EP, go to Nick Tate, Nictate, and thesharks.bandcamp.com, or search for them on your favourite streaming platform. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and that you'll join me again next time for some more super short fiction.